She called it a patience experiment. 30 days without physical contact, no hugging, no hand-holding, not even brushing fingers, no sleeping in the same bed. To reset the emotional wiring, she said, leaning on words she'd likely copied from a podcast. I nodded, asked questions I knew she'd rehearsed for, and when she finished explaining, I said yes. It wasn't agreement, it was containment, because something had shifted in her long before the experiment began. She'd become too composed. Our arguments had vanished, not resolved, just gone, like she no longer saw the point. She stopped asking about my day, stopped offering hers. Conversations thinned into summaries. I could feel her weighing everything before she spoke, like she was managing an image, one she hoped I wouldn't notice unraveling at the seams. The experiment gave her a script, a way to explain the distance without being asked about it. And I gave her space, not because I believed her, but because I wanted to see what she did with it. The first night she lit candles at dinner, said we should eat slower, practice presence. She smiled through it, held eye contact longer than necessary, like she was watching for a reaction. I gave her none. She moved into the guest room and filled it with books she hadn't touched in years. Left a yoga mat unrolled on the floor. Bought herself new journals, 3 of them. I saw the tags still hanging from the bindings. Each night she came into our room before bed to say goodnight. Her voice was gentle, deliberate. Once she leaned in like she might kiss my forehead. She stopped an inch short. "Boundaries," she whispered with a sheepish grin. I smiled back, said nothing. By day 3 she started taking early morning walks. She left without saying goodbye, returned flushed and quiet, sometimes with coffee, once with a smoothie, one she didn't offer me. She told me the stillness was healing. She said that more than once, as if repetition made it true. By day 4 she was texting more often. Her phone lived face down. She used headphones on every call. When I walked into the room, she lowered her voice just slightly. The kind of shift people make when they've told a story you weren't meant to hear. She said she was reconnecting with herself. Finding a grounded rhythm, she called it. I let her speak. I let the silence stretch when she finished. Because I wasn't chasing connection. I was watching patterns, and on day 5 the pattern broke. She left her phone on the charger in the kitchen. I wasn't looking for anything. But when the screen lit up, the message preview didn't leave room for doubt. Last night was worth the wait. The contact was saved under a woman's name. But the wording, the timing, the tone, I knew. I knew. She came down a few minutes later in leggings and a zip-up, hair damp from a shower she hadn't taken upstairs. She smiled when she saw me, walked over and kissed the top of my head. "Heading out," she said, grabbing her phone without looking at it. "Yoga, then breakfast with Jess." I met her eyes, calm, flat. "Enjoy." She hesitated, half a breath, then walked out the door. The screen door clicked closed behind her. That small sound, sharp and final. I didn't follow. I didn't rage. I opened my laptop and began preparing to know everything. I didn't touch her phone. I didn't need to. The message had already carved a clean line between before and after. I let that be enough for now. Because when someone tries to sell you discipline but can't hide a reckless mistake, they've already broken their own rules. I didn't sleep that night. Not from pain, from clarity. She came home late, just past 11, said nothing about yoga, said even less about Jess. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open, pretending to scroll through emails. She walked in, surprised to see me still up. Her voice was light, too light. "Long day, you good?" I didn't look up. "Productive." She nodded, poured herself tea, then lingered by the sink like she wanted me to ask something, but I didn't give her the rope. She took her mug upstairs, and I waited until the water shut off in the guest bathroom before moving. I started with timing. I pulled up the home Wi-Fi admin panel. I'd set it up years ago, created separate profiles for each device in the house. Her phone connected automatically. At 6:58 p.m. she'd left the network. At 11:12 p.m. she was back. Whatever yoga she attended didn't require cell service or a reliable router. Next, I checked our shared calendar. Nothing logged, I already knew that. But what caught my eye was the invite she'd sent herself a few days earlier, labeled Healing Breathwork Private Session. The location was blank. It was set to repeat every Thursday. She never mentioned it. The next morning she wore a loose cream sweater and no makeup. Said she felt raw in a good way. She made us breakfast, her movements deliberate, her voice calm. She talked about energy fields and neural resets, quoted a new therapist I'd never heard of. I chewed my food, nodded, said very little, because what stood out most wasn't what she said. It was how much of it was rehearsed. After breakfast, she grabbed her keys and said she was meeting a friend from her old yoga group. Friend I'd never met. She didn't name her, just a friend. Then she glanced at the mirror, adjusted her collar, and left without waiting for me to answer. I checked her location history. She de-disabled it, so I re-enabled it. Years ago, she'd lost her phone hiking in Big Sur, and I'd set up family sharing with a tracking backup. She'd forgotten, or assumed I had. I logged in from my work computer and watched the little blue dot pulse on the edge of the city. She wasn't at any yoga studio. She wasn't anywhere near her friend. She was parked in the lot of a boutique hotel, one we'd stayed at for our 5th anniversary. I sat there watching her dot not move for 2 hours. I didn't text, didn't call. I poured a coffee, sat on the back deck and listened to the late autumn breeze scrape through the trees. When her location finally shifted, it showed a detour. She stopped at a florist before coming home. Walked in holding a single sunflower and 2 croissants. She kissed my cheek again, said she'd been thinking of me. Slow mornings are good for my soul, she added, handing me the bag. I took the pastry, bit into it, looked her in the eye. You seem more grounded lately, I said. She smiled with gratitude, like I'd just affirmed her progress. I watched her carry the sunflower into the dining room and place it in a small vase, centered, perfect, fake stillness over real fire. She believed I was still under her spell. That was her mistake. Because I wasn't under anything anymore. I was above it, watching everything. The cruelty wasn't in what she did. It was in how easily she staged life as if nothing had changed. She kept the house warm, lit candles at dinner, sent midday texts with heart emojis and exclamation points. Hope your morning's going okay. Thinking of you. Like the distance she'd orchestrated between us was part of some sacred process instead of the alibi I now knew it was. She moved through the house like a woman in sync with herself. That was the part that struck me. She didn't act guilty, she acted polished, practiced. Maybe that was the most honest thing about her, how well she could compartmentalize when something threatened the image she needed to protect. And I played along, carefully. She'd sit across from me at dinner, folding her napkin in her lap, speaking softly about emotional transparency. Sometimes she'd reach for my hand instinctively, then stop herself, smile, and say, "Oh, wait, rules. Look at me breaking my own experiment." I smiled back. Let her think I was still invested in her premise. Each evening she'd disappear into the guest room with her journals and herbal teas. She kept a small essential oil diffuser running by her bed, giving the whole hallway a lavender fog. Some nights I'd hear soft music, instrumental, meditative, and once laughter. Not a phone call. Not a show. Just one short, sharp burst. Alone. When I asked her the next morning what had made her laugh, she paused just long enough. "Oh, nothing. I think I was journaling something ridiculous. You know me, always stuck in my head." It was the right answer, said wrong. She was always too measured when lying. That's what made her human. Not evil, not monstrous, just afraid of exposure. And beneath the control, the fear was growing. She began asking subtle questions. "How have you been feeling about us lately? Do you think this is helping? Do I seem different to you?" She asked with concern, but her eyes were scanning, looking for weakness or suspicion. I gave her neither, just nods and vague reassurances. Let her believe the illusion was holding. But I had my own questions, ones I never voiced. Like why her car had picked up a new dent on the passenger side 2 days ago. Small, fresh, not mentioned. Or why the old red scarf she used to wear every winter was suddenly gone from the coat rack, then reappeared a day later, washed, folded, and tucked into the backseat. She was hiding things in plain sight. Small items shifted, repurposed to fit a version of her life she thought I wouldn't notice. And each day she grew more devoted to the act. On day 8 she made French toast. From scratch. She stood at the stove humming softly to herself, the sleeves of her sweater rolled to her elbows. She plated it with fresh berries, placed it in front of me like we were newlyweds again. "This feels nice, doesn't it?" she said, sitting down, chin tilted like a woman reintroducing herself. I looked at the food, then at her. "Yeah," I said, keeping my voice even. "You're really consistent," she smiled, took that as praise. She didn't catch the subtext. That what I meant was she was so consistent it had become a pattern I could follow, map, record. The more effort she poured into pretending nothing was wrong, the clearer it became that everything was. You don't try this hard to appear faithful unless you're trying to bury what you've already done. I could have said something then, confronted her, but I knew I'd lose the upper hand. That's how emotional warfare works, whoever speaks first. So I waited, and I started documenting everything. I built a folder on a secure drive, passworded, buried 3 levels deep. I labeled it October. Each day got its own subfolder, screenshots of message previews, Wi-Fi disconnection times, GPS location traces, a photo of the scarf in the backseat, a receipt I found in the trash for a lunch at the exact hotel she'd been parked at, 2 entrees. Her handwriting was on the back, a note to herself, remember his allergy, no sesame. She wasn't just meeting him, she was learning him, customizing herself for him the way she used to for me. That was the twist of the knife. But I didn't pull it out, not yet. She wanted this patience experiment to be a performance, a test of willpower, a beautiful theory. I let it become what it was always going to be, a countdown. It wasn't about catching her anymore. I already had what I needed to know. This phase was about confirmation, structure, strategy. Evidence wasn't the end goal, it was the frame around the truth. On day 9, I installed a logging app on our home Wi-Fi router. It mapped every connected device's traffic, timestamps, domains visited, even app usage if you knew how to parse the data. I'd built the system myself years ago when I worked remotely and needed to monitor bandwidth. She never understood how it worked, or that it still existed. By day 11, her device had connected to a cloud storage site 7 times, an account I didn't recognize. I ran the address through an email trace and matched it to an account she used before we married. One she'd long abandoned or claimed too. She'd hidden her trail by keeping it separate from our shared devices, but old habits have a way of resurfacing. The username was a handle she used in college, one she thought I'd forgot. I hadn't. I got in, quietly, methodically. Inside the account were documents, photos, voice memos, some dated months back, some recent. The most recent folder was titled Reclaiming Self, a name that tried to sound empowering but reeked of guilt dressed in spirituality. She'd uploaded voice notes, recordings she made late at night, probably in the guest room. Journals too, and pictures. One of the pictures told me more than any paragraph ever could. A hotel room mirror selfie, her face mostly out of frame, bare shoulder, a man's hand in the corner holding a wine glass. Another image, her in front of a painting I recognized. A massive steel and oil abstract in the lobby of the Ridley Suites downtown. We'd taken a photo in front of that same painting 3 years ago. I remembered because she said it made her feel seen. I scrolled down. The next file was a memo, her voice low and soft like she was trying not to wake someone sleeping nearby. I know it's not ideal. I know this doesn't make me the person I wanted to be. But it's the first time in a long time I've felt honest. That's the part I'm holding onto, not the secrecy, the honesty inside it. She paused before continuing. I heard the bedsheets rustle. I don't want to hurt him, I just can't go back to pretending. Pretending, that's what she thought our life was, an act she'd been cast in. But what struck me wasn't the betrayal, it was how rehearsed even her confessions had become. She couldn't even speak to herself without trying to sound like the protagonist in some redemption story. That's when the shift happened in me. I stopped looking for signs. I stopped needing more proof. I knew where she'd been, who she'd become. And more importantly, I knew what I was going to do next. But before I moved, I needed one more thread tied off. I called in a favor from someone I trusted, Ryan, an old college friend who now worked in digital forensics for a private firm. I told him I needed a scan of my home devices, particularly one phone, but I couldn't afford any leaks. He knew me well enough not to ask questions. 2 days later, he sent me a summary, nothing invasive, just metadata. Her phone had been using a hidden messaging app, buried under a fake icon disguised as a meditation timer. The messages were encrypted, but the timestamps were damning. Long strings of conversation during work hours, while she was supposedly deep in journaling, while she was doing the emotional labor. She also created a hidden photo vault, one she accessed 3 times in the last week. The last session was 30 minutes long. I didn't open the contents. I didn't need to. The point wasn't to see more. It was to confirm she'd buried it. She believed her performance was airtight, believed her experiment bought her cover, but every move she made was cataloged, time-stamped, linked. Still, I didn't confront her, because people collapse fastest when they think they're still in control. I began my own countdown, 5 more days. I used that time to open a new bank account, copied our joint statements, made appointments with a family law specialist 2 towns over. I sat across from her at dinner, watching her float through her illusion while I built the structure that would hold when the curtain finally fell. And every time she smiled, every time she touched my arm and called it growth, I let her. I didn't flinch, because I was no longer the man she thought she'd outgrown. I was the one waiting on the other side of her story. I always thought the worst moment would be discovering the first truth. It was. The worst was discovering how many layers she had prepared to keep hidden and how many people had helped her do it. It started with a receipt, folded into her coat pocket tucked behind her gloves, a bar tab handwritten, not digital. I almost missed it. The name of the place rang a bell. Rivington Lounge. We'd been there once for a birthday party, but the tab was from last week. 2 cocktails, a high-end whiskey, and an appetizer that she'd never order. Lamb sliders. She was pescatarian now. Had been for 2 years. I looked up the bartender's name, written at the bottom with a smiley face. Served by Cal. He still worked there. I drove down that night, didn't dress like myself. No wedding ring, sat at the end of the bar, quiet, watched, waited. When he came over, I ordered a whiskey, let a few people pass before I spoke. "You've got neat handwriting," I said, showing him the receipt. He leaned in. "Damn, yeah, that was mine." I kept my tone casual. "I found it in my sister's coat. She's been meeting someone here and not saying much. Said it was a therapist. Didn't sound right." He hesitated, measured me, then smiled a little. "Man, I'm not trying to get anyone in trouble," he said, voice low. "But she's been in a few times, same guy each time, not exactly low-key." "What does he look like?" He gave a vague description, broad shoulders, dark jacket, always sat in the corner booth. Older, confident, well-dressed. But then he added a detail that stopped me. He called her by a different name. I blinked. "What name?" He squinted. "Wren, or maybe Wren, something like that." Wren. A name she'd used in college for creative projects, a name from before me, before us. She'd resurrected it. She hadn't just stepped outside the marriage. She'd built an alternate version of herself, new name, new story, new emotional truths to feed to the men who didn't know her full context. I nodded, thanked him, left a large tip. Walked out into the cold with something quieter than rage, something sharper, purpose. Back home, I pulled out her journals. She left them stacked on the desk in the guest room, unlocked, unsuspicious. She never expected me to read them because she thought I still believed in her process. That was her blind spot. One entry caught me, dated 2 weeks before she proposed the experiment. I told him the marriage was mostly routine, that we used to be close but lost the thread. He asked what I wanted. I said space to feel. It's easier when I talk to the second one. He listens better, less ego. I told him about my childhood and it felt safe. It's strange. I feel like 2 different women depending on who I'm with, but both feel more like me than I do in this house. Second one, not a mistake, not a metaphor. She wasn't hiding a single betrayal. She was managing a rotation. One man for validation, another for sympathy, me for stability. She decompartmentalized every man in her life to serve a different version of herself. But this wasn't just emotional rot. It was a risk with real-world consequences. One of the names she mentioned in shorthand matched someone I recognized. Married, prominent. A former client of a firm I'd contracted with. If that connection surfaced, I'd be pulled into the fallout, whether I deserved it or not. The betrayal had expanded from personal collapse to reputational threat. This wasn't infidelity. This was negligence with consequences. I went quiet, quieter than before, moved money to a trust, contacted a second attorney, one with experience in reputation management and privacy law, booked a storage unit, started pulling hard copies of everything, receipts, message logs, printed pages from her cloud backups. Not because I wanted to escalate everything, because I had to protect what was mine when the fallout landed. She deconstructed a lattice of half-truths, each man holding up a different beam of her identity. But she forgot the foundation was built on my name, my credit, my reputation, my quiet loyalty, and now she'd made that structure unstable. Day 14, she stood at the kitchen sink washing blueberries, talking about how good it felt to shed the layers. Said she was excited to plan a trip with me after the 30 days were over. A second honeymoon, something clean. I nodded. Let her believe I was still under the canopy she'd built, that I hadn't already stepped outside. The next phase wasn't about watching anymore. It was about controlling the unraveling. There's a moment in every unraveling where you stop asking why and start preparing for what comes next. That was day 17. She was in the garden that morning, pruning herbs she never cooked with, humming again. That same tuneless rhythm she always drifted into when she wanted to seem unbothered. And maybe she was. Maybe she believed she'd pulled it off. 30 days of patience, of spiritual rebirth, of distance baptized as healing. I watched her from the upstairs window, my coffee cooling untouched on the nightstand. I felt nothing, not hate, not heartbreak, just precision. That's when I knew I was done with her story. There was no confrontation in me yet. No shouting, no scenes. I didn't need her to confess. I already had the truth in writing, in pictures, in her own voice. What I needed was clean execution. No loopholes, no emotional leverage left in her hands. I took the day off work, quietly. No announcement. I cleared out my office at home, boxed the essentials, left the furniture. Drove everything to the storage unit I'd rented under a private LLC I'd registered the week before. Not for hiding, for protection. By noon, I met with the second attorney. Not a divorce specialist, an asset protection strategist. She was direct, efficient. Told me exactly what documentation I'd need to establish financial misrepresentation in case my wife attempted to dispute the separation of funds. I had every record already printed. My digital forensics report, IP logs, financial trails from her hidden accounts, all labeled, indexed, sealed. She looked at me across the table. Do you want her to know you know before you file? No, I said. I want her to learn after. By 3 p.m. I was at the bank. Split our shared account. She wouldn't notice, she barely checked. I froze all joint lines of credit, opened 2 new cards in my name only, moved my direct deposit, canceled the backup cards she'd kept in her wallet, the ones I'd forgotten I even gave her. By the time she came home, hair damp from another cold plunge ritual, new tote bag slung over her shoulder like a lifestyle ad, I had already cleared her access to every system she didn't know I controlled. She kissed my cheek. Told me I looked centered. You're quieter lately, she added, unpacking some overpriced raw juice. It's like something shifted in a good way. I held her gaze. Something did, she smiled, pleased with herself, and walked upstairs. I knew she was texting him, maybe both of them. I didn't need to read the messages to know the rhythm. The calm, the control, the self-congratulation. She was narrating her piece to people who had no stake in her consequences. Let her. That night I burned the last remnants of hesitation. I sat on our back porch, a single file folder on my lap, the original copy of the first love letter she'd written me still in the envelope. I read it once without emotion. Then I struck a match and lit the edge. Let it curl in on itself until the paper blackened and fell to ash in the tray. The symbolism wasn't for her. It was for me. That man, the one who believed in her intentions, was gone. At midnight, I uploaded everything. Secured backups. I created a separate, encrypted file with my voiceover narrating the timeline, dates, details, actions. Not as evidence for her, for me. I wanted a record of how calmly I built the bridge away from her. On day 19, I scheduled the delivery of the papers. Not from me. From a courier. She'd opened the envelope while I was at work, thinking it was a package she forgot she ordered. I imagined her expression when she realized it wasn't a journal or herbal tincture. It was truth, formatted in legal clarity. She told me once during the early days of the experiment that peace was power. She was right, but she never imagined I'd claim it without her. The courier arrived on day 21 at 10:13 a.m. I watched from my office window as she opened the door in a robe she never wore around me anymore. She smiled at the man, signed the tablet and took the envelope without suspicion. Then she disappeared inside. I didn't text. I didn't call. I gave her the full hour. That was intentional. Time to absorb, time to panic. Time to realize that whatever illusion she had been balancing was now seeping through the cracks. At 11:14 a.m. my phone buzzed, her name. I didn't answer. She called again. Then sent a message, "Can you come home, please?" I didn't respond to that either, but I did leave work early. She was waiting for me in the living room, standing in the center like a person rehearsing a monologue, hoping they could still shape the ending. Her makeup was uneven. She tried to present calm, but the edges were fraying. The envelope was open on the table, every document laid out. She had circled parts in pen. That detail struck me, still trying to control the narrative, even in collapse. As I stepped inside, she turned. Her voice came tight, too fast. "This is a mistake. We don't have to do this." I didn't speak right away. Let the silence do its work. She moved toward me, slower this time. "Can we talk about this first, without all the formal escalation?" I walked past her and sat down in the chair across from the documents. I let my eyes run over them one more time, not because I needed to, but because I wanted her to see that I was not rushed, that I had all the time in the world to finish what she started. She hovered near the table, fingers twitching toward the pages. "You blindsided me, okay? If you had questions, if something felt off, why didn't you come to me?" I looked at her then, not with anger, with complete clarity. "I had answers," I said, "not questions." She blinked. "What are you talking about?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't list accusations. I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder labeled October, set it gently on the table. She didn't open it, just stared at it like it might hiss. Inside were copies of the hotel receipts, screenshots of her location logs, transcriptions of her voice memos, a printed version of the message she received on day 5. Last night was worth the wait. When she didn't move, I opened the folder and slid the top page across the table toward her. The mirror selfie, her shoulder, his wine glass. She stared at it for a long time, jaw clenched. Then she said the thing I had expected, the thing all liars say when the foundation cracks. "This isn't what it looks like." I gave a quiet laugh. "Not cruel, just tired. You said that to him too. I heard it on the voicemail you deleted from your cloud. It synced back when you connected to the home Wi-Fi." Her breath caught. "That was when the cracks widened. You broke into my private—" "No," I interrupted. "I reclaimed what you stored on systems with my name attached." She went silent. I let that silence breathe. Let it hang there like truth does when it no longer needs validation. She sat down slowly, looked down at her hands. "I was lost," she murmured. "This experiment, I thought if I could just get space, I'd figure out who I was again." "You figured out how to build 3 lives simultaneously," I said evenly. "That takes coordination, not confusion." Her eyes welled. "Please, I'm asking you not to do this like this." I nodded once. "I know. I still love you," she whispered. I studied her face. The tears were real, so was the fear. "But love, no. Love is what you protect, what you don't rewrite to suit the room you're in." "You loved being believed," I said. "You loved the image, that's different." She opened her mouth, closed it again. No script left, no scene to direct. I stood, picked up the folder, slid it back into my bag. "This isn't retribution," I said as I walked toward the door. "This is accountability, the kind you avoided every time you called a lie growth." She didn't follow me, not because she didn't want to. Because, for the first time, she understood there was nothing left to say. The divorce papers went uncontested. That surprised everyone but me. She didn't try to delay or renegotiate. No protest, no strategy. She signed them 3 days after the confrontation and returned them through the same courier service I'd used. That told me what I needed to know. Whatever version of herself she'd been performing had finally collapsed under its own weight. I think she believed silence would soften the damage. That if she didn't resist, I might scale back the exposure. What she didn't understand was that exposure wasn't an act of vengeance. It was a line of protection. 2 days after filing, I had my attorney deliver a timeline to opposing counsel. Every major event documented, date stamped, with supporting exhibits. GPS logs, financial statements, security footage from the hotel valet service, 2 printed entries from her journals, all tagged and cross-referenced to demonstrate not just betrayal, but intention, not confusion, not emotional disconnection, intention. The marital home was in my name, purchased before the wedding, refinanced once with clear documentation that she waived equity claims in a prenuptial clause we'd both signed. She hadn't read it closely. Back then, she said she trusted me. And she was right to. I was never the one lying. Her attorney called mine on day 26, wanted to negotiate soft landing terms, said she was embarrassed, that she had no desire to drag things through the court. She wanted discretion, quiet division, no financial battles, no public narrative. I agreed. Under one condition, full separation of assets, zero alimony, and a written declaration waiving any future claim to reputation damages stemming from her actions. If she wanted silence, she had to earn it. She signed. The people around us started to notice. Friends, colleagues, her voice in group threads went quiet. She stopped RSVPing to things. Mutual friends who once played neutral stopped texting. One sent me a message. Heard what happened. I'm sorry, man. Should have said something sooner. So he'd known. Maybe not everything, but enough. That's the part that burned, not the betrayal alone, but how many people must have seen pieces of it and said nothing. One night, 2 weeks post-filing, I got a message from a woman named Claire. She was the wife of one of the men, the one from the hotel, the married one. I'd sent her the evidence anonymously back in week 2, hoping she'd connect the dots on her own. She did. Her message was brief. Thank you. I had no idea. I'm not staying either. I stared at the screen for a long time, not out of satisfaction, out of shared grief. Out of the quiet, grim understanding that sometimes a single truth ripples across 4 lives and everyone walks away marked. By the end of the month, her things were gone. She asked to come by in person to collect them. I declined, told her I'd have a courier deliver everything to a storage unit under her name. She didn't argue. There was no apology, no last letter confession, just silence. And I didn't need more than that. I changed the locks. Updated every password, every bank credential, every shared subscription. Removed her name from emergency contacts. Called my accountant and restructured the business to ensure nothing she could touch remained in my financial ecosystem. It wasn't about cruelty. It was about perimeter. The boundaries she hadn't respected, I now enforced with precision. Friends dropped her, quietly but completely. The ones who stayed in touch with her never reached out to me again. That was fine. Lines were drawn. I didn't chase anyone across them. She changed her profile picture to a mountain range, something vague and dignified, probably her way of saying she was finding herself again. Let her, because I wasn't interested in what she found next. The aftermath wasn't loud or explosive. It was dust settling, quiet doors locking, empty spaces where trust used to be, and me walking through them knowing I hadn't just ended a marriage. I dismantled a performance and refused to play the final scene.